Well, are pensions a good deal, especially for younger workers? A new study by the Fraser Institute says no. Jason Clemens is Executive Vice President with the Institute. Joins me now. Jason, I'm someone, you put this out and you caught my eye because it says anyone born after 1971 gets a bad deal from the Canada Pension Plan. I was born in 1971. I'm guessing it's not much better for me.
No, that's right. Anybody born after 1971 is looking at a real rate of return, so adjusting for inflation, of 2.1%. So in other words, when we look at what they contribute over the course of their working lives, which is now 47 years, relative to what they're going to get from the Canada Pension Plan during their retirement, the actual benefit is 2.1%, which I think anybody objectively would say is a pretty modest, even meager retirement benefit in terms of its rate of return.
You say 47 years, and nobody works 47 years. And then I realized I've been working since I was 14. So I've been working for 30 years now. Obviously part-time in the beginning. I wasn't a chimney sweep at a young age, but I've still got a lot of years left to go. And what I'm hearing from you is that all the money that they're taking from me, all the money that they'll be taking from me once they launch the Ontario plan, might be better off in a private account in terms of my financial security come retirement.
Right. So it's a really important question. So for younger workers, yourself, people basically in our data, anyone born after about 1960, it's pretty clear that over the long term, they would have been better off saving their money outside of the Canada Pension Plan. However, I mean, we did make a deal, in quotes, we did make a deal in 1966 to have a public plan. The reforms in 1997 to the Canada Pension Plan, which increased the tax rate, allowed for active investment of some of the funds. Those things are actually going to allow the Canada Pension Plan to get through the baby boom era, which is important. You know, when we look down south, there's real questions about the solvency of the American system through the baby boomers. Now, the cost of that solvency, though, is exactly what you've just said, which is there's a lot of workers, particularly those born after 1960, who, when you look at the costs and the benefits, it's pretty tough to say that there's a quote-unquote a fair deal. But again, that is the nature of the intergenerational transfer. That is the nature of the Canada Pension Plan. I mean, as I know all or most of your viewers know, from its inception, the Canada Pension Plan was designed to take the contribution of current workers and transfer it to current retirees. So it was never meant to be a quote-unquote savings program for individuals.
Yeah, people have this misguided notion that there's an account with their name on it and their money gets kept in that account and is invested. And that's simply not how CPP works, is it?
No, that's right. And in fact, I think some of the confusion, which I actually think has gotten worse in the last decade or so, I think a lot of that confusion now comes from the fact that the Canada Pension Plan has an independent investment entity that actually does very well. The last 5 years, for example, it's averaged over 11% real rate of return. But I think people confuse that, geez, there's this Canada Pension Plan investment, and I hear that it's doing really well, and so I put money in the Canada Pension Plan, and therefore I must be doing well.
Okay, so why don't we then? If it's getting 11%, why will I expect to get 2.1% when I retire 20, 30 years from now?
Right, and this is a really important question, Brian, which is that there actually is no direct link between how well the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board or the investment fund does and your retirement benefit or my retirement benefit or my parents. And so that disconnect is, I think, why people get confused, because your retirement benefit in the Canada Pension Plan is determined by the number of years you worked, your earnings in each of those years, and therefore your contributions to the Canada Pension Plan, and when you retire. So in other words, whether you retire before 65, at 65, or over 65. Nowhere in that calculation directly is the yield from the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. And so I think that is a central reason why we see this confusion, that people see these rates from the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board that are very good, and they think that must affect my benefit in retirement. And again, it is a source of confusion, and because there is no direct link.
So if they're doing so well, to me it sounds like, okay, there's extra money in there. Where's this extra money going?
Well, part of that extra money we want to be careful about in terms of how we characterize it, because what it's doing is increasing the level of pre-funding of benefits. In other words, what it's helping us to do is prevent any future tax increases and or benefit cuts to get us through the baby boom. Now, there may well be a debate in 10 or 15 or 20 years, if the fund continues to do well, to say, well, let's actually reduce the contribution rate or let's enhance the benefit rate within the existing program. And I think that's a worthwhile debate to have once we're fairly through the baby boom pressures. But that is very different than the current debate, which is whether or not we should expand the Canada Pension Plan. And I think it's important for your viewers to differentiate between those two questions because they are very different.
I know that I'm younger than most of the audience watching this, Jason, so I'm going into dangerous territory here. But as someone that came in after the cost of post-secondary education went up, it went from being very cheap or in some cases free, it skyrocketed. It's like, okay, well, the baby boomers went through, now we've got to raise funds. Now it's, we've got to get through the baby boom, so let's boost the cost of the pension. And I just feel like, am I getting a raw deal here?
Well, there's certainly some truth to the nature of the intergenerational transfer, particularly when we look at deficits and debt, as you've written and spoken about. When you look at the 1970s and the 1980s, Canada brought on a number of social programs that we didn't pay for. Basically, the decision, particularly the federal government, but many of the provincial governments, was we're going to bring on these programs and we're just going to finance them through debt. That large accumulation of debt came home to roost, so to speak, in the early 1990s. Thankfully, we went through a period of marked reform, got our house in order. Unfortunately, I think we're now in probably the 10th or 11th year of undoing all the good work we did in the 90s when it comes to debt and deficit. Because if you really want to understand the generational burden, you want to understand debts and deficits. Because, if you look at the amount of money provincial governments spend right now or the federal government spends right now just on interest payments, those interest payments are for past spending. That's the bulk. That's the real cost in today's terms of these intergenerational transfers. That's not to say we also don't see the same kind of transfers in the Canada Pension Plan or in healthcare. There's certainly intergenerational transfers there. But the bulk or the burden of the cost when we talk about intergenerational transfers tend to be on the debt and deficits. And unfortunately, we're getting worse right now. I mean, as you have all pointed out, we have a federal government now who has, by choice, increased substantially the deficit and therefore the interest costs that we will be paying, not on investment, not on infrastructure development, but on current spending, because they don't want to finance current spending with current taxes.
Just before we go, let's get back to the Canada Pension Plan side. And you looked at some numbers going back to, say, someone born a century ago, the rate of return that they received versus someone born in the 1940s. It's just a downward slope, isn't it? So if people are sitting there and they're 65, 70 years old thinking, oh, this young whippersnapper going off, no, they didn't do as well as the people that were before them, did they?
No, that's right. If you were one of the first people, which would have been 1967, 68, those people, retirees, would have gotten rates of return over 40%. If you then fast forward just 10 years, it's about 15, 16%. And as you say, it's just a cliff. And the reason for that cliff, again, is that people are having to contribute for a longer period of time, and the tax rate is increasing to the point now where, again, anybody born after 1971, you're looking at a long-term rate of 2.1%.
I wouldn't invest in that. Jason Clemens is Executive Vice President of the Fraser Institute. Thanks for the time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.